At 62, he fell for his best friend's daughter, but what happened next shocked everyone. At 62 years old, Frank liked to think of himself as a man who had lived a full life. He had spent decades working as a postman, walking the same neighborhood streets, delivering mail through rain, snow, and blistering heat. Retirement had come as both a relief and a challenge. Suddenly, the days stretched long, filled with quiet mornings and long afternoons where he often asked himself, "What now?" He was a widower for nearly 10 years, and though he tried to fill the emptiness with hobbies, gardening, fixing things around the house, and even attempting to learn how to bake sourdough, he knew that his heart longed for companionship. Still, he never imagined that the stirrings of affection would come from such an unexpected place. Frank's best friend George had been by his side for nearly 50 years. They had met in high school, bonded over basketball, and stood by each other through the ups and downs of life, marriages, kids, jobs, and eventually retirement. George was the kind of friend who could finish Frank's sentences, and together they had survived everything from broken hearts to broken cars. Every Friday they met for coffee or beer, laughing at old jokes, reliving memories, and occasionally complaining about their knees. It was during one of George's family gatherings that Frank's life took a turn he never expected. George's daughter Lily had come back to town after finishing her graduate studies. Frank remembered her as a little girl who used to run barefoot in the backyard while he and George grilled burgers. But when she walked into the living room that evening, smiling warmly as she greeted everyone, Frank nearly forgot to breathe. She wasn't the little girl he remembered. She was a woman now, confident, radiant, with long brown hair and an easy laugh that filled the room. Frank, who was never shy about joking, blurted out without thinking, "Lily, you'd better be careful. If you keep smiling like that, old men like me are going to need heart checkups." The room erupted in laughter. George shook his head and wagged a finger. "Hey Frank, that's my daughter you're talking about." Frank chuckled along with the others, pretending it was just another silly joke, but deep down something had shifted. He couldn't ignore the way Lily's presence made him feel lighter, younger, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. He scolded himself that night as he drove home. "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered. "She's young enough to be your daughter, she's George's daughter, snap out of it." But the heart doesn't always follow logic. Over the weeks that followed, Frank found himself crossing paths with Lily more often. Sometimes she needed a ride to the grocery store and Frank volunteered. Other times she mentioned that her sink was leaking or that her old laptop was running slow, and Frank, who loved fixing things, was quick to offer his help. She always greeted him with gratitude, sometimes with a warm hug that lingered just a little too long in his memory. Lily, for her part, seemed to enjoy Frank's company. She laughed at his corny jokes, listened when he talked about his garden, and even asked him to teach her how to bake bread. To her, Frank was a kind, funny, almost fatherly figure who gave her attention and encouragement. She didn't sense the storm of conflicting feelings that churned in his chest. Of course, George eventually noticed that Frank was too available. One afternoon, as they sat on George's porch with beers in hand, George leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Frank, I've got to ask, are you trying to apply for the role of son-in-law? Because the way you've been hanging around Lily, it looks suspicious." Frank nearly choked on his drink. "Son-in-law? George, come on, you'd never survive calling me family like that." The two burst into laughter, and for a moment the tension disappeared. But when George walked inside to grab more chips, Frank's smile faded. The joke had hit too close to the truth. He wrestled with guilt at night. He would pace his living room, running his hands through his graying hair, reminding himself that he valued George's friendship more than anything. "Don't ruin this," he whispered. "Don't let a silly crush mess up 50 years of loyalty." And yet, every time Lily called to ask if he wanted to join her for a walk in the park or a cup of coffee, he found it impossible to say no. Some situations turned almost comical. One afternoon, Frank tried to impress Lily by showing her how to repair a leaky faucet. He crouched under the sink, tools scattered around, but when he turned the valve, water sprayed everywhere, drenching him from head to toe. Lily burst into uncontrollable laughter, grabbing towels to help mop up the mess. Frank stood there, dripping wet, and joked, "Well, at least now you know I'm good at indoor showers." She laughed even harder, and though Frank's pride took a hit, he couldn't help but join in. Another time, during a family barbecue, Frank was tossing a football around with George and a few relatives. Trying to impress Lily, he threw a pass with all his might, only to trip over his own feet and tumble straight into a lawn chair. Everyone roared with laughter. George slapped him on the back, and Lily teased, "Nice dive, Frank. You sure you didn't play professional football in the '70s? Frank's face turned crimson, but the laughter bonded them in a way that words couldn't. Despite the humor, Frank knew he had to face reality. His feelings for Lily were real, but they had no future. She was young, her whole life ahead of her. For her, he was a friendly figure, perhaps even a mentor, but not a partner. And most importantly, he could never betray George's trust. One evening, as the sun set over the quiet town, Frank and Lily sat on the porch after watering her garden. The golden light painted her face with warmth, and for a moment, Frank felt an ache in his chest. But instead of speaking the words he sometimes rehearsed in his mind, he said something else. "Lily," he began gently, "you've got so much brightness ahead of you. Don't waste your time waiting for people to notice your worth. And if you ever feel lost, remember you've got more strength than you realize." She smiled, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Frank. You've always been like family to me. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Her words were both a comfort and a knife. They confirmed what he already knew: his role in her life was not that of a lover but of a friend, a mentor, almost like an uncle. And maybe that was enough. Later, over beers, Frank told George the truth, not the whole messy truth of his feelings, but enough. He admitted that he sometimes felt lonely, that being around Lily reminded him of the vitality he missed in his own life. George nodded, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "That's what family is for, Frank. We all need a little light to keep us going." In the end, Frank learned to laugh at himself. He told his story to friends, exaggerating the funny parts, the spraying faucet, the clumsy football tackle, and turned his feelings into a kind of humorous memory rather than a burden. He never confessed the depth of his affection to Lily, but he carried it quietly, transforming it into a reminder that even at 62, the heart is still capable of surprise. As the years rolled on, Frank found peace in the balance between honesty and restraint. He never lost George's friendship, he kept Lily's trust, and most importantly, he rediscovered that life after 60 wasn't about shutting down emotions, it was about learning how to handle them with grace. And whenever he told the story of that time I almost fell for my best friend's daughter, the room would erupt in laughter, but behind his smile was a quiet wisdom. Because sometimes the funniest stories hide the deepest truths about being human, about longing, and about the unexpected ways love keeps us alive, even when it's not meant to be.